Hello.
Hi. Oh, just so you know, the waiting room says celebration of a beautiful life. I feel
Oh,
like,
yeah, we've been trying to fix that. It's like,
okay, because I was like, is this a funeral?
no, it's actually like Prerna's old Zoom account.
Okay.
And for some reason, and she had used it for something else. Anyway, I
Okay.
can't figure out how to fix it. So that's what it is for right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
But hi, Masuma, how are you?
I'm good. How are you guys doing? Thank you so much for having me.
Oh,
Yeah, thank
no
you for doing
problem.
this.
I know that we talked about pronunciation on Slack, so can you say your first and last name for me so I know what it is?
Thank you for asking. I have more than one pronunciation of my name, so I never know how to pronounce my name, which is like a whole separate life conversation.
Huh.
Like it's said differently in India and by my family and at home, and differently in the West. But in the West, it said Masuma. In India, it
Masuma.
said
Okay.
Masuma. So either is fine.
Masuma. That's okay. Okay, cool. So Lakshmi. Okay, so nice to meet you. And so,
But
yeah,
I'm Maithili.
yes. So are you in London or where
I
are
am in
you?
London. Yeah,
Okay, so it's late. Is it like midnight or what time is it?
it's 11, but I'm so used to doing East Coast events. I've done West Coast events at this point. It's like whatever.
Oh,
Okay, cool.
okay.
No, we really
Thank you for
appreciate.
staying up for us.
I know, yeah. We as soon as I saw your book, I was like, oh, because I actually know Christy who interviewed you for Women's Media Center.
Oh, cool.
And so as soon as I saw your book, I'm like, oh, this would be perfect for Saja.
So Lakshmi, I'm just gonna do like a really brief 10-second Saja board thing announcement, just like welcoming people
Mhm.
and telling them that, it'll be like from 6:30 to 7:30, and then we'll have a Q&A about 20 minutes before the end.
Mhm.
And then do you want me to like send you the questions or should I read them out loud? How do you want
Um, so last time Mahir put them in the chat for me, like he like
Perfect.
DM
I'll
DM
put them in
them
the
to me,
chat.
and I read them. Yeah, so
Perfect. I
okay.
can do that. And then, yeah, if you have any technical issues, no worries. I mean, it's Zoom. We're all used to it by now.
Can I just say something?
um,
Actually, your name on here is Maithili. Mine was too. I just changed mine. You might want to change your Zoom name.
Oh, okay. I don't know.
I don't know why that happens.
I think
Okay, can you
just
change
have,
that,
like,
Michael? I always get mixed up with my
Can
Yeah.
you click on the three dots at the top of your?
Okay.
Oh, here, I'll change it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. I have no idea why that happened.
Okay.
We're all you.
Yes.
All the different sides of you.
And I don't know if other Saja people are coming, but that's okay.
And also, like, Miley, can we get the bookshop link? Like, I feel like you should throw in the link every 10 minutes. Because we want them to buy the book.
Yeah,
and I have
definitely.
the book, so I always hold it up because your lovely publicist sent me the book. So I love the book.
So I'll put the bookshop link in, and then I'll put like both your Twitter handles and like Saja links and stuff. And we're recording it, so once that's done, I'll like cut the video, and then
okay, cool.
Somebody will put it on the YouTube channel.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah. And we still have a few minutes, so we're fine.
Yeah, we're fine.
And everyone's good to go. You have water.
Yeah, I have water.
Went to the bathroom.
And is this camera angle okay? My house is a mess, so I just like put it against the white wall.
Yeah, I think it looks fine.
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
How have these events been going for you guys?
It's okay. Like last year we had like a pretty full year, I think. Because we did like our big annual event virtually as well. This year we kind of slowed down a little bit because we're all tired of.
I think also everyone's like zoomed out because Sopan Dave, like his book came out like right when the lockdown started. So actually I moderated his book about too, but like that was a lot of, also he's like buzzy, but also like I feel like people were like, I miss people. So that was like a lot of people. But I think since then it's been like
right. Yeah, and welcome to our International Women's Day event with Masuma Ahuja, who is the author of Girlhood, and Lakshmi Gandhi, who will be moderating our book talk tonight. We want this to simulate a regular book talk that you would have attended in a bookstore. ages and ages ago. So we're going to have a Q&A session about maybe around 7:10. We'll start but feel free to throw your questions in the chat. You can send them to everyone, or you can send them to me privately, or you can DM me on Twitter if you want to stay anonymous. That's fine too. Just let me know. And and then I'll send them to Lakshmi, and we'll ask our author of the evening all our questions. And please enjoy the book talk. And just to make a few Saja housekeeping announcements, if you are a writer and you have clips, or you have podcast episodes or job announcements or anything like that, please do send them to one of the board members. You can send them to me on Twitter. My name is Maithili. I'll put my Twitter handle in the chat. I do the weekly newsletter, and we want to share as much member news as possible with all your colleagues. So without further ado, Lakshmi, why don't you start us off?
Well, thank you so much. Happy International Women's Day, everyone. We were so excited when this lovely book came out because it's called Girlhood, Teens Around the World in Their Own Voices. And we just thought it would be the perfect International Women's Day read, because teen girls are the future of the world. And also, like, they are like a demographic that we don't pay much attention to until the ordinary lives of teenage girls do impact all aspects of our life. So Masuma, I just wanted to ask you, what made you decide to do this book and focus on girls, non-celebrity, non-activist girls, just girls in school or girls living their lives?
That's a good question. So my backstory is that I was working in newsrooms in the US. I was at the Washington Post and then at CNN. And then I moved my life into a suitcase and went back homeward where my family is in South Asia, and started bouncing around and reporting stories about girls and women, and writing the kinds of stories that I would have commissioned as an editor, that I understood that we told and reported, types of feature stories we see everywhere. And they generally fell into buckets that were very easy to identify after week 3, where it was stories about gender-based violence, victimization, sexualization, or on the other end of the spectrum, we had stories of the Gretas and Malalas and the exceptional girls fighting back. And that did not look like the conversations I was having with girls. That did not look like girls' actual lives. Even when I was reporting stories about child marriage or gender-based violence in all its different forms, the conversations I often spent most of my days with girls having were about their friends, their families, the things they were gossiping about, the things that they were staying up nights worrying about, the dreams they were plotting, what they did for fun, the books they liked, the music and movies they watched and listened to. And none of that stuff ever makes it into our coverage. And that's the stuff of life. And if we don't understand how people live, then the only understanding we have is of the worst things that happen to them or exceptional circumstances. And especially when we look outside the West, there's so little representation, even in culture, right? Like in books and movies, of what it is to be a girl in the world. And most of the representation that comes from Western creators, generally men, generally white men. And we don't actually get to see girls' lives from their own perspectives. So that was what made me decide to create the series for the Lily, which this book is then based on.
Definitely. And tell us a little bit about the girl you used to be, because I know your official bio says you grew up in or you called 3 countries home. So where did you spend your teen years, and how was each country different?
I was born and raised in India, moved to the US when I was in middle school, and then came to England, where I am now again, for college. I don't know why I paused there. I was like, when did I come to England? That's such a good question. I came here for college, my whole life stories. I went back to the US to work for a few years, then went back to South Asia, bounced around there, and then came back to England. So my life has very much been split between these 3 continents. And for me, growing up, I think that growing up when you're in that at that point in middle school, that it was very clear that people just didn't understand each other on both sides, and had very little or limited understanding of what life looked like elsewhere. And the story that I've been telling a lot recently in book publicity, which is just it seared itself in my brain at the time, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot recently. I moved to Pittsburgh. That was the first school I went to in the US. And I have a very clear memory of my first day of school outfit, which is first day of school for any year, but add on to that, new school, new country, new everything. I was really, into it. black jeans and like this gray and orange t-shirt, can like still visualize it. And I went to homeroom and I was like so excited to be in a school where I didn't have to wear uniforms. And one of the kids in my homeroom was like, I don't understand. Like, why are you dressed like us? I thought you were coming from India. Like, don't you guys have elephants on the streets and like snake charmers? I was like, dude, no. Like, I grew up in big cities. That is not what my home looks like. And then I'd go home and meet my friends from school and they'd be like, so is it like the OC? Like, is it just one big party? I was like, no, that's not what my life looks like at all. And there was constant, just like across connections where people didn't understand life on either side, which is what most of my teenage years looked like, was just like telling people, no, it's actually not like TV at all. I'm sorry. Or like, no, it's not like that one book you read. I'm really sorry. Or, the UK isn't just the Beatles. Like, that's all you've got. No, I'm sorry.
So a lot of apologizing. But it was so the book is just really fascinating because you intro each girl and it's in like alphabetical order. I was just really struck by the alphabetical order because sometimes you'll get like just the whole gamut of experiences. Like you'll get a teen mom followed by a Shawn Mendes fan. Like that's literally what happens because we have Emily, who's like a teen mom, and then in Brazil, in like the favelas, followed by this girl in Ireland, Emily, who's a fanatical Shawn Mendes fan and like writes blogs. So like how did you pick the girls, but also like what did they have in common, or what were some of the things that like what were some of the gaps in their experiences?
It's interesting that you mentioned alphabetical order because that was a very deliberate decision, and lots of like long conversations with my publishers and editors about this. And I was like, we're not going to do this by continent because that isn't the point. Like this is going to be alphabetical, which is very much what we're trying to do here. And trying to create any other structure just seemed very artificial to me. And in terms of finding girls, I had no real like requirement beyond, I was just looking for girls who wanted to share their lives. There's 900 million adolescent girls in the world. There's no way in which this book could be comprehensive. So I understood that, but I did want to make sure it was representative and inclusive of a lot of different types of experiences. At the same time, I was very upfront with all the girls that the only thing you represent is yourself and your own life. So you are not speaking for your country, for any part of your identity. You only have to write about what you want to write about, right? So there's a lot of stuff that just doesn't come up in the book, and that is very much okay with me. And I understood that I'm asking a lot of these girls even to like share their diary entries. It's a big ask for anyone. And this is going to live for a long time and they're so young. But the things that are common are really beautiful. And also I think just like the things that are common in life, right? Like they all talk about their friends. And a surprising commonality for me was realizing that most of them felt like their friendships did not look like what they thought friendships should look like. Or a lot of them are like, oh, I don't have that many friends. Here are names of my 6 closest friends. And I'm like, you have 6 closest friends and you're saying you don't have that many friends? Like, dude, you're fine. There's a lot of girls in the book who left home to go either to the closest big city or to another country for high school, for secondary school, or for college, because that's where educational opportunities exist. That like the experience of leaving home was something that resonated with me a lot and something I think about a lot. And it felt very like it was through the pages of the book, wherever in the world you are, that was something that was in common that they talked about. A lot of them just talked about the expectations people have of what it is to be a girl in the world, and feeling very isolated in that because there's so much shame associated with any choice you make. There's such high expectations for how you should exist and like what you should be doing, and there's no right decisions whatever you do. But also there's a lot of joy in the book, right? There's just the things that bring joy into their lives, the things they enjoy. A lot of the girls have like similar favorite bands, similar favorite books, which is kind of cool and so unexpected. Kalima, the girl from Afghanistan, loves Celine Dion, which is like one of my favorite things, where it took me like 7 times asking her like, so tell me more about the music you like. And she would, give me like a really important answer about like women's empowerment. I'd be like, that's great, Halima, but what about the music you like? And eventually she was like, I really like Celine Dion. I just didn't think that was, important or interesting, but like that's real life. And it's nice to see that we can all find something in common with girls everywhere.
Definitely. And I feel like Emily, the young woman in Brazil, just kept sticking out to me because she's a married mom. She's 18. But her story is just so hopeful because she's not in school, but she's still like She wants to be a doctor. She is trying to be the best mom she could be, like, and it's just so startling, and you just want the best for all these girls, but like, you know, like you're like, you really see what they're up against, but they still often have a lot of hope, right? So, well, what was it like building these relationships and like seeing like sometimes a lot of tragedy or sometimes a lot of like pain too?
I mean, the thing that has stuck with me and that I hope like comes through in the book and in all the work I do is that every person is a person, right? They're not the worst of their circumstances. They're not just the tragedies that befall them or the circumstances they're born into, but they're also people. And in most of my conversations with them, we were just talking like any two people would about their lives, right? And they would tell me about the things that are difficult, like Emily had so many cards stacked against her, but also all of these girls are at the very beginning, and that's the thing that really stuck with me is when you're like 13 or 14 or 18, you're at the very beginning of your life and there's so much ahead of you and you have so much hope, which she does and all the girls do, right? Like they have such big dreams. She wants to become a doctor, and now she has a daughter and she wants her daughter to become a doctor as well, and she writes about that. And in reading it, a lot of people have responded to her story specifically and said, it's really difficult to read that and like recognize that just her being her it seems like a really difficult thing, and like how is she going to make it work? She's out of school right now, and she has to raise her kid, which is hard to read but is also reality for lots and lots of girls out there. And I think it's helpful for me as a reader of her story to recognize that she isn't just a person who is struggling with the fact that she is a teen mom, right? She's also a person who's really excited about what the future holds.
No, that was like I'm not surprised that so many people were struck by her story because I just kept returning to it because she was just so amazing. But also you worry about them. I felt like I was like worried about so many of these girls. But especially like there you could definitely see the difference between the girls from like the global south and the girls from like the west, because a lot of the girls like Emily, a couple of the girls from India, like they were really worried about like, well, pregnancy. They were worried about their friends that were dropping out of school because they were either like have to get married or they were pregnant, or their parents were afraid that something bad was going to happen to them and that they should stay close to home. And so um like and then at the same time we see like the Shawn Mendes fans and the girls going to concerts, and like sometimes it's the same girl doing both. But like, so it was just really striking how like the things the restrictions, not only in like legal restrictions, but also like cultural restrictions, like, oh, I'm not going to let you go because I can't afford it, or it's not safe. And like, yeah, how are these girls navigating both like limitations by society, but also the limitations from their families?
I think so. Another thing I feel like is worth mentioning is that it's not just the girls from the global south who are struggling. Like one of the girls in the book, Shanae, she grew up in the Bronx, and she I feel like I can share this because she did an Instagram takeover for like this book account today, and she shared a poem that she wrote, and she started out by telling viewers on Instagram that she has no place that she calls home except her college dorm room right now. There's nowhere else she can go, and she feels really displaced, and she's struggling with that. Sophie from the US, from Missouri, writes about struggles with mental health. Amia from London writes about racism, right? Like there's struggles everywhere. It's just different tiers of what you're dealing with and what you're pushing back against. So I don't remember what your question was. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was just talking about like how some of the girls were just really restricted by their families. So it's not only like was it in South Africa where it's like teen moms can like get certain amounts of support, but a lot of the families, because of like the shame factor, they don't want their daughters to like pursue like, even though like the legal battle to get this support was huge and like a big thing, but they still can't get it because their families are like, no, because then people will know you're a teen mom.
Yeah, you're talking about, Mandisa, the girl from South Africa, wrote about a friend of hers, actually. It was really interesting. She mentioned it started out with like we had drama class today, and I was really excited to like do my scene in drama class. And then the teachers left and we were all sitting around and having a chat. And then it goes into, in her diary entry, she talks about one of her friends who fell pregnant and had to drop out of school. And South Africa is one of the, I think, 26 countries in sub-Saharan Africa which have legal support for teen moms and make sure that teen moms can stay in school, because I know this has changed in one, maybe two of the countries since I wrote the book in late 2019. But there were 3 countries at that time in sub-Saharan Africa where you could not return to school if you were, or government schools, once you were pregnant. So, in theory, this girl should have been able to go back to school, but her family was like, no, you can't. And her community said no. And there's a big difference between laws being there in like the letter of the law and actual enforcement of laws. And also a thing I think about when I think about that conversation is like, what does it actually mean to have to drop out of school, right? Like, say you say, I want to stay in school to your parents. What does that mean? Who's going to take care of your child for you? Like, what does childcare look like? Who's paying for school? And maybe you go to a government school, are uniforms required? Does someone have to pay for books? Who's paying for that? Is your family going to stop paying for it? Are you expected to get married? So a lot of those restrictions come in as well. It's never just like a simple yes or no question. Another girl in the book, Rakaya from Baghdad, she talked a lot about her friends who gotten married. They were all teenagers. And she was very clear that that was not the path for her. And that was not what her parents wanted. And like, they had those conversations, but we text from time to time, and it's a thing that comes up constantly whenever she texts me, just an update about another friend who got married. And just, it seems like that is the world around her. And even though she doesn't face the pressure from her own family, it feels very present in her world.
No, that's so interesting. And one of our audience members wants to know, like, how did you find these girls? Like, and how did you pick them?
I found the girls in every way you could possibly imagine. So I was never going to approach a girl directly and be like, hello, you don't know me, talk to me, like share your story in a book, because that's creepy and that's not how you should do things. So I went through people I knew in some places. I reached out to people, we've all had like that one coffee with a friend of a friend when you move to the same city. I reached out to those friends of friends and was like, hey, remember you told me you had a cousin who lived in X country? Can you introduce me to that cousin? I'm trying to reach teenage girls there. Sometimes it was through organizations that the girls were affiliated with. So for example, Claudie, the girl in the book, the surfboard, she is from Vanuatu, and she is part of the Vanuatu Surf Association. So I reached her through that. Another girl, Alejandra from Argentina, is a soccer player. And so I reached her through a sports association for girls there. I reached some of the girls like Emma in Ireland through a writing program she was in. Sometimes I reached girls through their schools, their school teachers, through volunteers in their community, or people, just like it was every way possible. People who had, like the girl in Russia, I reached through someone who like grew up near her, I think, and then they went to college, and that person's journalism professor introduced me to them. And then it was like through a million different people. But basically, I was trying to reach girls in lots of different paths of life, walks of life, different places, through lots of different people who might know them.
Claudie was another like memorable girl, the surfer. She was another memorable girl because the Pacific Islands, where she's from, like global warming is very much a reality in her life. Like not only is she a surfer, but also like the health of the ocean and like the economy. And we see that how like global warming affects women and young girls disproportionately. So like it's not an issue that she's going to worry about when she's older, because it's like literally affecting her right now, right? So did a lot of girls like have those immediate concerns about the world around them?
A lot of them had, I think they had concerns about what their lives would look like. And then a lot of them are very politically engaged and cared about the future of the planet, cared about the kind of world they were going to grow up into and the kind of world they wanted to live in, right? As adults, like that's what it means to be young and to be politically engaged, is you care about like what rights you'll have, whether you'll have clean air to breathe, whether the place you call home will still exist, or natural disasters would have swept it away, whether the people you love will have rights or not. So these concerns often came up through them talking about their lives, which is just generally how politics come up, in my opinion anyways. It was very rarely, there were a couple of girls who very clearly were like, hey, this is how I'm politically engaged, I'm an activist, this is how these issues play out in my life. But very often it came up more in conversations about how the concerns they had for the future and the kind of world they wanted to build and live in.
That's so interesting because like even in any pop culture, in any country, like teen girls are kind of a punchline. They're like, oh, stop acting like a 15-year-old girl, or like, why are you so obsessed like a little girl or something. But these girls have like these full, elaborate lives. Like, was part of your motivation behind the book to like push back against those narratives?
Absolutely. Girls individually, like all people individually, are powerful and should be given respect for the people they are. And then girls as a collective are often seen as frivolous, which is just like deeply untrue, because in every study out there, in everything, like girls are such drivers of everything, right? Like pop culture is just the tastes of girls. We treat their tastes as so frivolous, but also every pop culture icon is generally, like, through the decades, through all geographies, pop culture is driven by the tastes of teen girls. We know that investing in girls' education is like the most cost-effective strategy in addressing climate change. We know it's one of the most cost-effective ways of like building the health of economies, of building better democracies, of building more representative societies, and still we treat them as frivolous, which is just silly.
Yes. And so another audience member wanted to ask, like, how much time did you spend talking with the teens in the book? And also, did you just talk to the 30, or were there girls that like didn't quite make the book?
There were more girls I talked to, and for different reasons. Sometimes they have lives, right? Like sometimes exams come up and it's like, hey, sorry, I can only get back to you like after this really stressful period in my life. I'm like, hey, I have a book deadline, I'm really sorry, I need like something in the next X months. Sometimes things fell through, just like going back and forth. People moved, people's lives changed. Some of the girls I was communicating with through someone because I didn't speak the same language as them, or technology made it impossible for us to communicate directly. So in those circumstances, it was a lot of me sending questions through someone to the girls. Um, some of the girls I was texting with, and we would go back and forth and keep talking, and they would answer my questions. But I also wanted to be respectful of their time, because it was asking a lot, firstly, to have them share diary entries and photos, and to answer all the questions I wanted, and to share their lives with the world in a book. So I didn't want to just like demand so much of their time that it became a stressor.
Certainly. And like, did any parents have any questions for you, or were any parents like reluctant about their participation, or what was like building relationships with the families?
I was very clear that I wanted to make sure that I included girls whose families and communities were going to be okay with them being included in the book, and it wasn't going to at any point pose a threat to the girls' safety, to their well-being, that they were in the book. So that was the thing in the selection of girls for the book. I didn't want to include anyone for whom it would be a problem or could potentially become a problem. I obviously like answered every question everyone had, both about the book and about me, because it's like, hey, if I'm asking you about your life, you get to ask me about, like, one of the girls. I remember we were texting on WhatsApp, and her mom was fine with it, and she seemed fine with it. She was like, I want to understand more of your motivations for this project. So I was like, okay, this is a very serious, and we had a back and forth where I felt like I was being interviewed with her and by her, and I was like, okay, I really respect you for doing this, but also you're allowed to ask me these questions, because I'm like, I'm asking you to share all of this. But generally, the girls I was including, their parents were on board with this and understood what it was going to be. And it helped that I had a series to point to from before to say, hey, this is what it'll look like, kind of, but with more and in a book form.
No, that's really great. And our next audience question was something I was wondering about while I was reading, because like I said, like as I was reading, I kept like wondering about the girls, worrying about them. So how do you recommend anyone become a better global citizen? And how has your book impacted the way you interact with others and the greater global community?
I think if there's anything I hope people take away from this in terms of being a more engaged global citizen, it is to try to have conversations with people who exist in the world in different ways from you do,
Mhm.
right? To talk to girls, to actually listen to what they say, to take them seriously. And it doesn't have to, like, you don't have to look across the world to engage with girls. There are probably girls in your community wherever you are and whatever your community looks like, who could do with an adult asking them about their lives and wanting to know about their thoughts and investing in them, whether that's you investing your own time, or helping connect them with someone who can help them with opportunities that they're interested in, or just being someone who like helps them figure out their homework, or helps figure out what their next plans should be, because we every like girls everywhere just need more people actually showing up for them.
For sure. And our next question is like about like the nature of this project is very, very personal. So how did you find the balance between being invested in these girls, but maintaining your own mental health while telling these emotional stories?
That is a very good question that I wish I had a better answer to. I don't know what the answer to the question is, honestly. It was such a whirlwind for me in terms of putting this book together, um, that it was very often like I was getting stories from all over the world in like short spurts of time. And I tried to make sure that I sat with each girl's story for a period of time and like engaged with her directly. And then getting to know the girls honestly as people always helped me, because if I felt really bogged down by like the difficulties in their lives, I also worried a little bit that I wasn't whenever I talked to them or interacted with them directly, there was just laughter in the conversation, or we would find something we had in common, or they would tell me something really interesting about how their father makes X food that they really like, and like I would, I'd want to know more, and they tell me the recipe, and it would just become a real conversation about a real thing. And understanding them as humans made the burden feel lighter in terms of like the difficult stories I was hearing and reporting on.
Yes, because like one of the things that also struck me was that these girls did a lot of unpaid labor. Like, what was the name of the girl from Lucknow?
Ruxar.
Yes, Ruxar. She wakes up like almost earlier than any of the adults, and by the time she goes to school, she's already cooked a meal, dressed a bunch of children. Like she's done a lot of work. And so, like, how do these girls balance? Because she's also in school and like doing the best she can. Like, how does she balance it all, or how do they create these systems to like still thrive?
I think they just have to,
Mhm.
right? Like I did a story for the Lily, kind of like a weirdly like a follow-up, like a bookend on the other side that was out today, where I interviewed 5 girls from different places about life in the pandemic, right? Like what does life look like beyond the headlines? A couple of girls from the book, and I went back to them, and one who was like in the original series. So we have her life now from 2018 to 2021 recorded in some form, which is kind of cool. And one of the girls from India in that story, Gomti, she lives in Lucknow, and she is a domestic worker and is also in the 12th grade. And she was telling me about her schedule, and it was very intense. She wakes up in the morning, she does some housework, like starts cooking a meal, then goes and works a job from like 10 to 12, comes back, makes lunch, gets dressed, goes to school, does her full day of school, comes home, changes, goes to next job, goes and works for a couple of hours, comes home, makes dinner, then does homework. And I was just like, that's a lot of work. Like, you've got a lot of jobs you're doing. Like, homework is a job, going to school is a job. How are you handling it? And she said, well, I've been doing it since I was 11. So this is just life, right?
Mhm.
There's no answer beyond like, I just have to, so I do.
And how are these girls like actively like pushing back against gender expectations? Because obviously sometimes you can't, like if your parents are making you work, you have to work basically. But like how are they pushing back? 'Cause
For a lot of these girls, it's not like your parents are making you work. It's also work is a way to pay school fees, or it's a way to support your family, or to like pay for the school uniform or for the books, and to make sure you can still go to school. And I think for a lot of them, the ways in which they push back is just by like being themselves and taking up space in the world, and like pursuing what they want to pursue, right? Which is something that for so many, for girls everywhere really, we're still trying to explain why girls should be more than wives and mothers, and should be allowed to do whatever jobs they want to do and exist in the world however they want to exist in the world. So these girls unapologetically just pursuing what they want to is a step in that direction.
yes, certainly. And another question about like the actual creation of the book, was this a full-time project, or did you have were you doing something else concurrently?
So the book, my like the timeline of the book was like the book, everything like got inked in, I should know this, shouldn't I? Like late January, early February, and then I had 6 months. I basically had 6 months to put the book together, and for 2 of those months, I was working on another project as well, and doing 2 things at once. Basically, I wasn't sleeping at all. Um, and then I needed some. I was also bouncing around a lot in this time, and was moving basically every 3 weeks and living out of a suitcase, and realized I couldn't finish this book if I didn't actually sit down in one place and dedicate the time to doing it. So, and like I needed it for my own mental health because I had been reporting on all sorts of really intense stuff and been constantly in motion. And so I stopped for, I think, the last like 3.5 months, sat in one place, did nothing else except finish this book.
That's really, really cool. And this book is written for the teen audience. And as everyone has heard, like there are some heavy topics that these girls go through. So how did you like, distill these topics in like, it's very easy to understand, like anyone from like 12 to 18 could totally understand like the ins and outs of the policy in these girls' lives. But how did you train your brain to like write for like an audience that's younger?
That is a good question. The one that was the hardest to explain, I encourage everyone to sit with this. And this was like in my like final copy edits where I caught this and I was like, this cannot go into the book the way it is. And it was like in lockdown, I was staying with some family friends and we all like I like called a family. I was like, I'm not a member of your family, but like calling a family meeting right now. Like I need help. And they were like, okay, what's wrong? I was like, how do we define what the Soviet bloc is for a 12-year-old? And or the Soviet Union. And they were like, oh, bloc. And I was like, what's a bloc? And no one knew how to define a block. And it was like a history graduate sitting there and like looking up like source material. I was like, I don't know how to define what the Soviet Union is. But it's just basically like saying things in English, right? Like getting rid of all the jargon and explaining like the basics of what a thing is, which is much easier sometimes, I find, than like writing for an adult audience, because we can get so wrapped up in trying to like explain the ins and outs of things that we lose sight of the big picture. But like, I'm just trying to get the big picture across here.
No, that's so true. And this is obviously an event for the South Asian Journalists Association. So I just wanted to like hear a little bit about like how this book came to be. So it started out as a series for the Lily, and like how did you turn like an article series of articles into a book? Like what was that process like?
So it started out as a series. It was a series that was a newsletter series. So we were doing one a week. And towards the end of that, I actually got it. I was working on a separate reporting project, which like kind of taken up my whole life. And I was working on turning that into a book I had like found agents. I was working on that. And then I got an email in my spam from a publisher. It's like a PSA, check your spam box, saying, hey, we really like the series. Have you ever thought about writing a book? And I was like, oh, well, yes, but also I never thought anyone, like, I don't feel done with this. I don't really know what to do with it. I have been like throwing ideas around with my friends of like, can I turn this into more? But I don't know what the more is yet. This seems like a great next thing because I don't feel done telling girls stories. And so then I talked to the publisher and like put together a memo, and then the book was born.
That's really, really great. And what was it like, finding an agent and like, what was that process like?
So I was, when I was looking for my agents, I was looking to pitch a completely different book, which now in the process of selling. But I made a list, made an Excel spreadsheet of basically looked up all the agents out there. The way I found on google.com to find agents. I had no idea how this world worked. And I felt very much like imposter syndrome about like, am I even a writer? Like, I still don't feel like a writer. I don't feel like I can claim the title of writer. Like, it's too lofty for me. I'm just a person who makes books. I looked into agents who were thanked in the acknowledgements of books I liked by different journalists. Most of my reporting and the other reporting project was also about women, South Asia and the Middle East. And so I knew that I wanted to work with women of color, if possible. I wanted to work with people who had like an understanding of the international space and who I wasn't like trying to explain Sri Lanka to or trying to explain Lebanon to. Like, I just wanted people who I wasn't explaining why this should be a thing to. I queried a bunch of agents. Like there's all sorts of guides online, but you basically send like the first 10 pages of your proposal where you like make a market case and why this should exist in the world and show some of your writing. And weirdly, the first agent I queried ended up being the person I signed with. And we found out like a year later that we both went to the same high school. Just like we did not know, weird small world. But I talked to a bunch of agents, and if there was like a piece of advice, if anyone wants my advice on this, is that like very much go with your gut about like how you feel about talking to people, because of all the agents I talked to, my agents, I just felt like they got it. And I am very grateful for like listening to my gut, even though there were like reasons to go with other people, because I just feel a sense of relief whenever I see their names in my inbox now, because I know they're like on my side and I can ask them anything and there's no stupid questions with them. And they're constant advocates for me. One of my agents is a South Asian American woman. So like there's a lot of things where I have like struggles to articulate pushback, like I've had to give on different things I'm working on, where it's like, I'll like talk around an issue and then they'll come back to me and be like, are you saying you don't want to exoticize people? I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, except I used like 700 words to say that. And I don't have to do the explaining, which is great.
No, that is really great. And well, just writing, like what you mentioned, like writing a book in 6 months sounds, especially if you were working on another project at the same time, like how did you actually do it? Like I know that you said like, oh, I have to sit down and do this, but what would be your advice for somebody else with like, a very tight time frame?
You just gotta like sit down every day and decide like how much you can do in your days, what your days should look like, what works for you. But a thing that like I really struggled with like getting started. So I had to like figure out how to start putting words on screen, because I felt like I wasn't like writing good. I was very worried about not writing a good book. And I remember getting on the phone with a friend, Wes Lowry, who's also a journalist and writer. I was like, Wes, I just feel like I'm not going to write a good book and I really need to write a good book. And he was like, there's no such thing as like a good book. You just like do good reporting every day and you do good writing every day. And like, it's all about the process, not the product. Like stop worrying so much about the end product. And I was like, okay, that makes sense to me. I know how to do good reporting. I'm really scared I don't know how to do good writing. And I was like, well, I could just sit here and stare at the screen forever, or I can just do some bad writing. And that really helped me. It was like, okay, I just need to write X amount of words every day. Like I made my timeline of like, I need to like do this by this month. I need to do this by this month. Everything was completely thrown out the window when I actually started working, but making sure I had some time every day to like just sit down and write a few thousand words was, that was what I needed to do.
That's incredible. And obviously as a reporter, you're used to deadlines to some degree.
I love deadlines.
And well, what do you think you learned about like girlhood while like learning these stories and getting to know these girls?
I think the thing that I was reminded of is how powerful girls are, how clear their voices are. And before I started reporting, I felt like this was before the series even, I felt like I was also going into stories the way a lot of editors did, where it was like, let's tell a story about child marriage, or let's tell a story about like a girl fighting back to change her community. And I was trying to fit people into like story archetypes. They're people, they're not stories. And getting to know them as people, I was reminded of just like how much power they have, how much hope they have for the future, and often how clear their voices are before like the world happens to them in big ways as they grow older and have to like fight back even more against all the different forces in the world.
That's amazing. And where do you see this project going from here? Because I know that you want to continue it in some ways. So like where do you see this going?
Yeah, I did not feel done with. It's funny where a book is supposed to be like the end, right? Like the thing you work toward. And for me, it feels very much like a beginning and not an end. And I don't feel done, in part because, like, as I said earlier, I have so many more stories of girls in my hard drive, in like just conversations with girls I've had. And I thought a lot about, what makes sense for the next thing for me to do with this. And as a journalist, like part of my brain was like, I can make a podcast, I can make a video series, like, let me pitch this, let me pitch that. And then I stopped and I realized that everything I was thinking of could only scale to the number of hours I had in a day. And I was still at the center of like getting these girls' stories out there. And that didn't feel like quite the right thing for me as I want to scale this. So starting a new media venture, or one arm is investing in giving girls the tools to tell their own stories. So running storytelling workshops for girls. Right now I'm in a pilot, which is all virtual, but in the future it's going to be in partnership with community organizations in different communities around the world. And then mentoring those girls, actually investing in them, like connecting them with people who can workshop their work with them and spend time with them, and giving them a platform to publish their work. So getting it also out into the world, not just having it exist in their notebooks or in the workshop space, but also putting it out into the world so girls who don't participate and girls from other places can hear what other girls are going through and feel seen.
That sounds great. And have you heard from any of the girls since the book came out, or like how do they feel now that their stories are like out in the world in this book?
It's really wonderful. They're all so excited about it. One of the girls, Mandisa from South Africa, we were on a call and it was really wonderful where she said, I understood that like you had told me that this was going to be the book and that my photos would be there and my words would be there. And then I saw it and it was a book and my photos were there and my words were there. And like, I didn't expect that. Like I knew it, but I didn't expect it because there's so much power in just seeing your words printed on the pages of a book, right? And like the validation that your words belong there. So they've all been really excited.
And is that part of the reason you wanted this book to be in diary entry format? Or like, how did you decide on that format?
I mean, girls are every person is the best person to tell their own story. And so these girls were obviously going to be the best people to tell their own stories. And, I gave them instructions, but I also encouraged them to just like throw out my instructions and write about whatever they wanted to write about, because I really wanted them to drive the conversation. And there's something about a diary entry which feels very intimate for those of us for a lot of people, writing in a diary is a very familiar task, right? Like a lot of people have diaries. A lot of the girls just sent me photos of their diaries. They were like, hey, can I just send you the last 3 days? I was like, yeah, that's okay. Like, I might ask you for more information, but you can. Some people had never even heard of this concept and it was just completely foreign. And I was like, okay, like, what do you want me to do? Like, why do you care about when I woke up? And like, why should I write about my feelings? But there is something about having a space that is all your own to put your words and your feelings and your thoughts on paper and for that to just exist and say, this is just my space and only what I think matters here. And I get to tell the story of who I am.
Yes, and I just thought it was so fascinating that some of the girls were like literally texting you or emailing you in real time. So you'd hear about like things that happened to them like 2 or 3 hours after it happened. Like what was that like? Like just like getting these like real-time updates.
I tried really hard to push them to not send me real-time updates so they could have the feeling of like putting words on page, but they were like, why don't you not want to know about my day? I was like, no, I do want to know. I want to know like after you've had time to process, which some of the girls just like didn't understand, and that was fine. And it was just like I was a pen pal, right? But I was trying very hard not to respond back and be like, hey, that sounds fun, or that sounds, because I didn't want it to be like social media or performative space. I wanted it very much to be a space where they did not feel judged or like they had to perform in real time for the audience of me.
And it felt like very immediate, like even the entries that weren't like sent to you in real time. And like, was there anything that surprised you about the whole process that you like were surprised to learn or surprised to discover?
I think I was surprised by how much we all have in common everywhere, and like just like the basics of life are the basics of life everywhere, right? And like sometimes I would like see myself or like my family reflected in family dynamics in like Mongolia. I'd be like, whoa, that is not expected. Also, a lot of pop culture is universal. Girls like a lot of the same books and a lot of the same music everywhere, watching the same movies. And it's interesting also as they grow up, a lot more of the girls are on social media now than they were 2 years ago when we talked. And so a lot more of them are reaching out to me on like Facebook or Instagram or wherever, where 2 years ago it was very much like a, hey, we're completely offline. And it feels very much like as time passes, they're more online.
That's really neat. And like you mentioned this earlier, but a lot of the girls like are separated from their place of birth. Like there are a few girls that are refugees, or there are a few girls that are sent away for school, or they have to move for their parents' jobs. And like, were you surprised by that theme of the book? Because there is a lot of migration in the book.
There is a lot of migration. I understood I knew the numbers, right? There's like 258 million migrants in the world, or at least a couple of years ago there were. So like I knew the scale, like if migrants are a country, they're like whatever, one of the most populous ones in the world. But it felt very like present everywhere. And also what stuck with me more with that was like there are two girls in the book who Barbara from Russia and Roxa, who grew up in China and then comes to the UK for high school, who wrote about something that felt very familiar to me as a many-time migrant, where they wrote about like the longing for just the big wide world out there and everything it holds and all the promise it holds and just excitement to like get out of the boring town they're in where everything feels predictable and the future is just like, oh, I can see it all happening. And Raksha writes about like, I'm gonna have a I could see I'm gonna have a mediocre job and, you know, have 2 kids and play mahjong on Fridays. And like, I don't want that. And then you leave home and it's like, oh, this is the adventure and like the big promise opportunity, but also I miss like the really basic things of like comforts of home and the people I was with, and homesickness is very present as well, which I hadn't realized was like, for me, I hadn't realized was a universal thing. And I thought it was very unique to like me as a person, just not being able to make up my mind about places.
No, that was amazing. And like, what do you want? Like, I know that the book has been out for about a month, right? And so, like, what has it been like to like hear from readers of the book? Because you know, you said that like a couple of the girl stories, like in particular, people give you feedback on. And like, what do you want people to take away from the book?
It's been really like heartwarming to hear that the girls' stories are resonating with people. And you know, a lot of adults have said this is a book that I wish I had as a teen. And I'm like, yes, that's why I made this. And that's really great to hear. And a lot of the teens, like I've gotten photos of, you know, girls just lost in the book. And that to me is like all I want for it. And for readers of the book, I mean, I hope that every person who picks up the book recognizes that their words belong on the pages of a book. And for every girl who picks up the book, she realizes that too, because like that's just my hope, that every girl understands that she could be in here too, and her voice and her story is important.
Definitely, like everyone's story is important. And this was so lovely. And I'm gonna hold up the book again. It's Girlhood. The bookshop link is in the chat. We encourage you to purchase it. But thank you so much. And I'm gonna turn it back to Maithili, but this was a really great conversation.
Thank you so much.
And thank you, Masuma and Lakshmi, for this really interesting conversation. Again, the bookshop link for the book is in the chat, and you can follow Masuma and Lakshmi on Twitter. And please do read The Lily. It is actually a Saja member, Nima Roshanya Patel, is the managing editor for The Lily. It's a wonderful news source about all kinds of stories about young women all over the world. So it's it's a very unique source for news that the Washington Post has started. And they have great reporting, and you know, Masuma's book actually started as a series there. So we hope you can read them and follow them as well. And if anyone has any last minute questions about the book or the book writing process, you know I talked to Masuma earlier about the finding an agent. And if you have any other advice for us as journalists trying to write books, that would be great if you would be willing to share that.
If you have specific questions, I feel like just book writing is hard, but you just got to do it. Stick with it. That's my only advice.
Got it. That is half the battle, I think. But thank you, everyone, and happy International Women's Day. I think we're going to wrap up now, unless anyone has other questions, which I think we got through everything, but I'll leave the meeting open for a little while so you guys can look at the links and buy the book, please. And thank you again to our author and our moderator, and keep following all our Saja emails every Friday. We send the newsletter and we have event emails coming up too. And thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay.